In one of the most renowned biblical tales highlighting the perils of anger, we find the story of two brothers, Cain and Abel. Cain, the elder, chose the life of a farmer, while Abel, the younger, became a shepherd. When Cain presented an offering from his harvest to God, it was not accepted. Conversely, when Abel offered his firstborn sheep, God was pleased and accepted it. Overcome with a deep rage, Cain's expression turned dark. God noticed and questioned him, "Why are you angry, and why is your face downcast? If you do well, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do well, sin lies at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must master it." God's words to Cain were a warning to examine his anger and control it. Unfortunately, Cain did not heed this advice. Instead, he allowed his fury to take over, leading him to commit the ultimate crime against his brother. This story starkly illustrates how unchecked anger can escalate into devastating actions, revealing the potential for destruction inherent in uncontrolled wrath. God urged Cain to reflect on his anger, suggesting there was no justifiable cause for his feelings. Sadly, Cain chose not to confront his emotional turmoil. Instead, he gave in to his rage and killed his brother. The tale of Cain and Abel vividly demonstrates how unchecked anger can drive someone to commit heinous acts, such as fratricide. Beyond envy, this story also illustrates the deadly sin of wrath, a form of extreme, uncontrollable anger that often leads to destructive and regrettable outcomes. Given that the term wrath has fallen out of common use, this discussion will focus on the more familiar term anger. It's important to note that from a Christian perspective, anger and wrath are not the same. Unlike the Buddhist and Stoic philosophies, which generally view anger as problematic, Christianity differentiates between acceptable and sinful anger. Wrath in particular is deemed sinful by Christians. Thus, understanding the distinction between anger and wrath is crucial to comprehending why wrath is considered a sin in Christian doctrine. The 7 deadly sins, a cornerstone of Christian teaching, outlines 7 grave offenses: pride, greed, lust, envy, gluttony, wrath, and sloth. These are seen as transgressions against God, oneself, in the broader world. The concept originated with the desert father, Evagrius Ponticus, who initially listed 8 evil thoughts: gluttony, lust, avarice, anger, sloth, sadness, vainglory, and pride. His list was influenced by Greek and Roman philosophical traditions, notably the ethics of Aristotle. In the 6th century, Pope Gregory I refined Evagrius's list into the 7 deadly sins as we know them today. This video series delves into the 7 deadly sins, examining their relevance and impact on modern life. What makes these sins so detrimental? How do they manifest in contemporary society, affecting our well-being and that of those around us? Furthermore, can non-Christians find value in this framework? This particular essay focuses on the emotion of anger and its sinful counterpart, wrath. As the scripture advises, "Be not quick in your spirit to become angry, for anger lodges in the heart of fools." This exploration aims to illuminate the nature of anger and the critical differences between justifiable anger and sinful wrath. If you find this video interesting, please click the like button, subscribe to the channel to stay with us, and support us on the path of sharing valuable and useful knowledge. Is anger always sinful? According to the Bible, it isn't. The Bible makes a clear distinction between righteous and unrighteous anger, indicating that there are situations where anger is justified. The deadly sin of wrath refers specifically to unrighteous anger, which should be avoided as it exceeds justified bounds. Cain's anger toward his brother Abel, fueled by envy and a sense of unjust treatment from God, is an example of unrighteous anger from a Christian perspective. But what exactly differentiates righteous anger from unrighteous anger? And when does anger transform into wrath? Firstly, in the Christian worldview, the emotion of anger is not inherently sinful. It is considered morally neutral. However, due to its potentially dangerous nature, anger can easily lead one into sin. As the Bible cautions, "In your anger do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold." This means that while experiencing anger is natural, it is crucial to manage it properly and avoid letting it lead to sinful actions. So if the emotion of anger isn't a sin in itself, what part of it can be considered sinful? What distinguishes morally neutral anger from sinful wrath? Numerous descriptions exist that elucidate what makes wrath sinful and how it differs from anger. Fundamentally, the key difference lies in how wrath manifests in the external world. While anger can be managed and calmed, wrath signifies that anger has spiraled out of control, leading to destructive actions, and even murder as demonstrated in the story of Cain and Abel. Wrath is considered sinful because it transcends the boundaries of justified anger, turning into a force that harms others and oneself. In contrast, anger, when appropriately controlled and channeled, can be a response to injustice or wrongdoing without resulting in sin. The destructive nature of wrath is what makes it one of the capital sins, while anger remains a morally neutral emotion that must be carefully regulated to avoid leading to sinful behavior. But in some cases, expressing anger isn't sinful. For example, Jesus once violently drove out a group of merchants and money changers from the temple. In that instance, his anger was righteous, rooted in a desire for justice and the protection of the sanctity of God's house from becoming a marketplace. This illustrates that Christians can express anger and even violence when it serves a righteous purpose. For instance, we might feel anger when our loved ones are mistreated or use force to protect them. Such forms of anger are not only acceptable, but can also be commendable from a Christian perspective. Many argue that failing to respond with anger to genuine wrongdoings would itself be sinful. Why wouldn't someone be angry in the face of evil? Righteous anger reacts against sin and injustice, making it a force for good when used appropriately. In short, righteous anger reacts against sin. Even God himself often expresses anger in the Old Testament, consistently directing it at sin. As the scripture states, God is a just judge, and God is angry with the wicked every day. However, from a Christian perspective, righteous anger should be used sparingly, and unrighteous anger should be avoided. But when is anger considered unrighteous? While there are various interpretations, there is a general consensus on several key aspects. Unrighteous anger is typically characterized by its intensity and the circumstances surrounding it. If the anger is disproportionate to the situation, driven by personal grudges, or leads to harmful actions, it is deemed unrighteous. Additionally, anger that stems from ego, pride, or a desire for revenge rather than a legitimate response to injustice falls into the category of unrighteous anger. First of all, does the intensity of the anger fit the circumstances? Anger can start as righteous, but may grow out of proportion, becoming unequal to its cause. For example, we might feel justified anger if someone lies to us, recognizing the sinful nature of lying. However, if this anger escalates into physical violence or long-lasting feelings of revenge, it transforms into wrath and becomes disproportionate. In contemporary society, it has become common to react with a short fuse toward those holding different opinions. Rather than choosing compassion and understanding, people often respond with immediate anger and hostility when encountering differing views. This brings us to another crucial factor in identifying unrighteous anger: the cause of our anger. Are we reacting to something genuinely sinful or simply something we dislike? If our anger is directed at non-sinful matters, it is unrighteous. Thus, our anger may be more about our egos or personal preferences and may be entirely out of proportion. Another deciding factor is how we manage our anger. Observing the current social media landscape reveals that many users fuel both their own and others' anger. Entire YouTube channels and social media pages are dedicated to sustaining and intensifying anger through their content. For example, if we spend our days watching videos designed to provoke anger, we exacerbate our feelings beyond what is reasonable. Even if the initial anger is justified, there is nothing constructive about continually amplifying it by focusing excessively on negative aspects of existence. Media outlets often select and magnify specific topics, making them appear more significant than they are. Immersing ourselves in such content leads to a distorted view of the world. In extreme cases, this continual cultivation of anger can result in tragic outcomes, such as violent acts. As the scripture warns, fools give full vent to their rage, but the wise bring calm in the end. This highlights the importance of managing anger wisely, avoiding its escalation into destructive wrath. The Bible also guides us on how to handle anger. For instance, consider this verse from Ephesians. In your anger do not sin, do not let the sun go down while you are still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold. This verse offers three key pieces of advice. First, it implies that it is possible to experience anger without engaging in sinful behavior. From a Christian perspective, while anger is a natural emotion, we have a choice in how we respond to it. We can choose to act in ways that are not sinful. Second, the verse advises against holding on to anger for an extended period. It's better to address the issue quickly or let go of it rather than dwelling in bitterness and resentment. Third, the verse warns that prolonged anger can give the devil an opportunity to influence our thoughts and actions. From the Christian viewpoint, the devil aims to create division and discord, and lingering anger provides a fertile ground for this to happen. By following these guidelines, we can manage our anger in ways that align with Christian teachings, avoiding the pitfalls that can lead to sin and disruption in our lives and relationships. To summarize, from a Christian viewpoint, the emotion of anger isn't sinful in itself, but is fertile ground for sin. If we let our anger escalate into wrath, we enter the domain of sin. But can anger actually be useful, or is it better to be avoided? When we're angry, we experience a strong discontent towards certain circumstances. This anger could be a response to present situations, past events, or even anticipated future occurrences. Philosophers and psychologists throughout history have explored not only how anger functions, but also whether anger is inherently bad or if it can be beneficial. While some argue that anger, when controlled, can be a force for positive change, motivating us to address injustices or wrongs, others believe it is a dangerous emotion that should be carefully managed to avoid destructive outcomes. The consensus seems to be that anger, in its righteous form, can be constructive, but when it turns into wrath, it becomes harmful and sinful. Aristotle's position, much like the Christian perspective, did not oppose anger outright. He viewed anger as a natural response to certain situations and potentially beneficial when appropriately managed. In his Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle stated, "The man who is angry acknowledged the destructive nature of excessive, uncontrolled anger, which he called irascibility." He also identified two types of angry individuals, the hot-tempered and the sulky. The hot-tempered are those who do not restrain their anger due to their quickness of temper. However, their anger dissipates quickly once they have retaliated. On the other hand, the sulky are those who retain their anger for a long time because they repress their passion. They only find release through revenge as their long-repressed anger festers. Aristotle's insights suggest that while anger can be a natural and sometimes beneficial response, its management is crucial. Uncontrolled or excessive anger can lead to destructive outcomes, whether through quick, explosive reactions or prolonged, festering resentment. As the Stoics strive to maintain inner peace regardless of adversity, anger is entirely unwelcome in the mind of a Stoic sage. In his work Of Anger, Seneca firmly rejects the notion that anger can be utilized, controlled, or harnessed constructively. He argues, in the first place, it is easier to banish dangerous passions than to rule them. It is easier not to admit them than to keep them in order when admitted. For when they have established themselves in possession, they are hard to dislodge. Seneca directly criticizes Aristotle's claim that anger is necessary and beneficial in a fight, likening it to a soldier rather than a general. Seneca dismisses this as untrue, asserting that anger is inherently unhelpful because it does not heed reason. He argues that if an emotion can be controlled and guided by reason, it is not truly anger. True anger, according to Seneca, is uncontrollable, and once unleashed, leads to regrettable actions. Seneca further highlights the destructive nature of anger by comparing it to pride, stating that if pride is the deadliest sin, then anger is the bloodiest. Historical events provide ample evidence of how anger has led to massive bloodshed and suffering. This perspective underscores the Stoic belief in eliminating dangerous passions altogether to maintain tranquility and avoid the dire consequences of unrestrained anger. An example of the destructive power of anger is the ancient Roman Emperor Nero, whose volatile temper led him to react violently and irrationally to perceived threats or challenges to his authority. During his reign, a great fire ravaged a significant portion of Rome, and Nero, in his rage, blamed the Christians, resulting in their severe persecution. This historical episode vividly demonstrates how excessive anger can lead to atrocities against humanity. The destructiveness of anger also manifests on a smaller scale. The biblical story of Cain and Abel illustrates this, where Cain, driven by rage and jealousy, murders his brother Abel. Another biblical example is King Saul's rage toward David. Saul, the first king of the Israelites, appointed David as the commander of his forces. However, as David achieved success, Saul's anger and resentment grew, leading him to repeatedly attempt to kill David, but ultimately failing. These examples underscore how uncontrolled anger, whether on a grand or personal scale, can result in destructive and tragic outcomes. In our everyday lives, we can see the destructive power of anger in relationships and personal interactions. Consider the example of a boy who had a bad temper and frequently became angry over the smallest things, often swearing and breaking items in his frustration. To help his son manage his anger, the boy's father gave him a bag of nails and a hammer, instructing him to drive a nail into the fence each time he lost his temper. Initially, the boy found himself hammering numerous nails into the fence daily. However, after a few days, he saw the unsightly appearance of the fence filled with nails and began to realize the impact of his anger. Motivated to improve, he gradually learned to control his temper. Each day, he managed to stay calm. His father allowed him to remove one nail from the fence. Over time, the boy saw a significant reduction in the number of nails, symbolizing his progress in managing his anger. This story illustrates how the visible consequences of uncontrolled anger can motivate personal change and the importance of learning to manage our emotions to avoid damaging relationships and our surroundings. The distinction between righteous and unrighteous anger clarifies that anger itself is not intrinsically wrong. The risk lies in succumbing to wrath, a sinful, excessive, and uncontrolled form of anger that leads to destructive and regrettable actions. Aristotle, however, believes that rage can be useful if it is properly and justifiably harnessed. Unlike the Christian perspective, he views anger more pragmatically without the concept of sin. The tale of the angry boy and the nails eloquently demonstrates how unchecked anger can irreparably damage people and relationships. From a Christian viewpoint, the question of whether anger is good or bad depends on how it is managed and expressed. Righteous anger, when directed against wrongdoing and injustice, can be morally admirable. In contrast, unrighteous wrath is characterized by its disproportionate intensity relative to the situation. The Stoics, however, see anger as entirely detrimental to maintaining inner peace. They argue that any form of anger disrupts tranquility and rational thought. Thus, while Christianity and Aristotle may find some redeeming qualities in controlled anger, the Stoics advocate for its complete elimination to achieve a serene and rational mind. Thank you for watching. If you find this video interesting, please click the like button, subscribe to the channel to stay with us, and support us on the path of sharing valuable and useful knowledge.